There was this couple who were going to be going for a private audience to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And they told their two children that they were coming along and they were going to be a part of this private audience. This is in a day before iPads, before YouTube. That was enough to enthuse these young children. They were excited about the prospect of going to meet this giant of a man. And they were told as well that the Rebbe was going to be giving them a bracha, a special blessing. And they were especially excited about that too. That day, big day came, they had their private audience, they were in with the Rebbe. Now, the Rebbe's style always was, when giving a bracha, a blessing, to look at the individual child or adult and extend a blessing to them in accordance with their particular requests. And in this instance, telling the young boy that he should grow up to be a chassid, a Yerushalayim, a God-fearing individual, a pious individual, and a learned individual, and gave him all the necessary blessing. But as far as the young boy is concerned, he didn't get a blessing. You see, there is an ancient custom where parents put their hands on their children's heads every Friday night and they bless their children. That is the understanding of this young boy's concept of a blessing. So as far as he's concerned, the Rebbe didn't give him a blessing. It didn't happen quite the way he had anticipated. And so when the private audience is over, the mother proceeds to leave the room with her older daughter, but the little boy sits down on the floor in the Rebbe's room and starts to cry. In that moment, the Rebbe became very serious. And he looks to the father and he asks in Yiddish, "Was weint why is he crying?" The father had no clue, but God gives greater intuition to the Jewish woman. The mother leans in to her husband and says, he's crying because he thinks he didn't get a blessing. And she explained why. And then she proceeded to beat a hasty retreat from the Rebbe's room with her older daughter. The father looked to the Rebbe and said, he thinks he didn't get a blessing because this is what we do at home every Friday night. We put our hands on our children's heads and give them a blessing. And the Rebbe smiled and the Rebbe said in Yiddish, Nayim and Hagim and Chabad, these are new customs you're bringing into Chabad, because in Chabad the custom is only to do this on the eve of Yom Kippur, but not necessarily every Friday night. But at that point, the Rebbe then proceeded to call the young child over to the side of his table, put his holy hand on the young child's head, and gave him the traditional blessing, the priestly blessing, God should bless you, God should always watch over you, and so on and so forth. And then the Rebbe told the father, don't repeat the story outside of this room because I don't want other people to be aware of it. Maybe they'll be jealous, they'll ask for the same, etc. So how do I know this story if it wasn't to be repeated? And the answer is because I was that little boy. And every Friday night thereafter, my parents always reminded me of what had happened in that room. I have that image still vividly ingrained in my head, the Rebbe putting his hand on my head and giving me that blessing, because it was repeated to me week in, week out. Every single time my parents continued to give me that same blessing. But why am I repeating the story right now if it wasn't to be repeated? Perhaps because of the bigger message and the bigger story that it tells. See, I can imagine that scenario repeating itself in any number of different settings. And it would typically be a case of just getting this annoying child out of the room, moving him along, and that's it. But it was always the case, and that was the Rebbe's enduring legacy, that when a Jewish child is crying, the world stops, and there's only but one question. Was weint why is he crying? And then, and even more so, doing anything and everything out of the ordinary to do whatever is required to be able to put paid to that particular child's tears. There are a lot of Jewish children out there who are crying. Sometimes the tears are readily discernible. Often, in fact, most times they're not. They're crying so deeply within, they're oblivious to their own tears. But the challenge in that moment is that when we encounter that child, be they 3 or 33, and we see them crying, we need to ask the question, was weint why is he or why is she crying? And then to do whatever is necessary, however much it might take us out of our own comfort zones, to put paid to those particular tears. Even as Jews today might seem to be leaving their roots, you might say abandon their past, their souls remain eminently connected to Source. And they feel that threat of disconnection, and they're crying out no matter how far they run. And in essence, they can never really quite hide. They find a place to come back to. They find an experience that touches their souls. The Rebbe, in his timeless wisdom, foresaw that reality as it would envelop our Jewish world. And so he sent out literally thousands of shluchim and shluchot, messengers throughout the world, such that they would be strategically placed to respond to the tears everywhere, that they would be the Rebbe to that particular individual, whomever they might be. You know, when the prophets promise us that at the end of days, no Jews will be left behind. They're telling us categorically that one way or another, every member of the Jewish faith will find their way home. Only God is looking to you and me to help him in that task, to hasten the process. So when the opportunity comes your way, it's because that interaction is intended specifically for you. You are meant to be the Rebbe to that child in that moment in time. It's up to us to simply be alert to the reality that surrounds us, to be attuned to the cries and then put pay to the tears. That is the Rebbe's enduring legacy now 25 years on since his actual passing. That is his enduring impact. That is our ongoing challenge. May we all indeed find success in that mission and bring salvation to all of our world. Shabbat Shalom.